The margins between trail bikes and enduro bikes are often fine ones, but ultimately it's the design and component specification that leads to a difference in performance out in the hills. The two bikes I have today, the brand new e-ONE-EIGHTY and the e-ONE-SIXTY SL from Merida, go one step higher. Now, the perfect tools to discuss the crossover between enduro and super enduro and downhill. I'm here in northern Spain to get into the details. EMTB has become a riddle. There are so many different options: suspension, travel, motors, batteries, range extenders, geometry and specifications, and there has been an awful lot of focus on weight recently. You see, mountain bike decisions have remained relatively simple, with cross-country, enduro and downhill being the main categories. An enduro mountain bike will carry a weight difference over a cross-country bike simply because it's attempting bigger things and it has different parts, so to call it a weight penalty would therefore be incorrect. And the same applies to these two Meridas, two very different bikes offering different opportunities and feelings on the trail. So before we get into details, let's take a quick look at the differences between these two bikes. 180 millimeters of travel versus 160. An aluminium frame versus carbon fibre. 27 kilograms versus 19. 85 newton meters of torque versus 65. And what really matters here is we have two different motors and two different classes of bike. The enduro versus, let's call this the super enduro. And whilst the SL does weigh much closer to a mountain bike than the 180, it's still much more bike than a mountain bike. We live in a time where many people on mountain bikes are spending increasing amounts of time paying for uplifts in bike parks, which is partly down to people's time being under pressure. Both of these bikes are an answer to those situations. If we were to summarise really quickly, then the e-ONE-EIGHTY is a perfect bike park bike for sessioning downhill, whilst the SL is a bike of immense capability for trail and enduro riding, and lots of it. So, conclusion done then. Yet when we discuss purpose and handling, handling is now a two-way business, up and down. The eMtb is a different discipline to MTB and doesn't necessarily have to fit to timetables or man-made trails. The eMtb for many people is a sport of uphill and downhill technicality, and as such must be central to any comparing and contrasting. The Merida e-ONE-EIGHTY, it's a big bruiser designed for chaos. 180mm of front and rear travel. Aluminium frame, it's got mixed wheel size. The small rear wheel is actually really good for when things do get super steep. You have that space at the back. You have a huge 800 watt-hour battery that is removable, and you have the 600 watts of peak power and 85 newton meters of torque from the Bosch CX, which has been updated. The space for a 250 watt-hour range extender or water bottle, should you fancy. And this bike is a category 5 rated bike, which means you can throw this down the bike parks without voiding your 5-year warranty. And the system is rated up to 140 kilograms. There's an all-new suspension layout and kinematic on this bike. You've got the bearing on the rear triangle and in the shock eyelet as well. You're dealing with a big stroke shock, 75mm. It's got a progressive kinematic, so it's got this big RockShox Vivid Ultimate air shock on there, but you can run a coil on it if you want. Plus you can go nuts and fit a triple clamp fork up front. You can tell that reliability has been thoroughly thought about when Merida designed this bike. It's also got their agilometer sizing idea to this bike. So this bike comes with 230mm drop post, absolutely massive, but you can reset that maximum height should you wish. Just undo the collar, sit on it, get down to the correct height, do it back up. So you can choose your bike on your reach rather than the standover height or the maximum height for your saddle. It's got a straight seat tube on this bike with massive insertion depth, so you can get those big drop posts. And it's got a 64.5 degree head angle, which is slightly steeper, half a degree steeper than the 160 bike, and a sort of more conservative reach, so 460 on this bike. And they designed that in because they knew this bike was going to be heavier. They wanted to still feel super agile. This shock mount part of the bike has been completely redesigned to make it more simple, drop a little bit of weight, but also take off some of that side load on that rear shock. Because this bike is going to be rowdy, you're going to give that rear shock a hard time. So the e-ONE-SIXTY SL is built for slightly less chaos than the e-ONE-EIGHTY, but this is still a light assist enduro bike, so things still can get pretty rowdy. It's got 160 mm of travel front and rear. It's slightly less progressive kinematic than the 180, but it is designed to be used with these small piggyback shocks. And it is full carbon frame that keeps the weight between 19 and 20 kilograms depending on the size. Has a Bosch SX drive unit with the same peak power but less torque, which we'll get into, a 400 watt-hour non-removable battery, and actually both bikes can run this 250 watt-hour Bosch range extender. Again, this distinctive new frame layout with no yoke on the shock, and actually it incorporates that Bosch charge port there as well. They've dropped a bearing pivot on the rear of this bike that is now a flex stay, so saves some weight and some maintenance. This bike comes standard as a full 29, but you do have the option as a flip chip on the rear if you want to run 27.5 rear wheel, which is going to reduce that chainstay length, but also bumps up the rear travel to 174 millimeters. It's got almost identical geometry to the regular enduro bike. Got a steep seat angle and a big drop seat post, means you can get pretty aggressive going up the hills. And then you've got a 64 degree head angle, nice and slack, and a pretty generous 460 mm reach in the mid-size bike that I'm riding. And the big SRAM Maven brakes give you an idea of what you're supposed to do back down the hill. There's a couple of really neat touches that I like on this bike. You've got this axle handle basically, which is an Allen key, and that's a 4 and a 6, which does almost every single bolt on this bike. And if that doesn't do everything, you've got a multi-tool underneath the saddle. You've got more tool storage here. I've got a nice tube tucked on there. You can really easily swap out your bottle cage for your range extender. Plus, you can even run a really long rear mudguard should you wish. So you've got power, travel, battery and weight to consider here. What do you do? Which bike do you choose? Well, I think it's actually as much about you as it is your bike. For example, the decision to go for more or less power has less to do with effort and weight than many brands might lead you to believe. Less weight is great if the topic is about lifting and carrying, but it's not necessarily faster either uphill or down. More fuel and power is nice, yes, but if you're 70 kilograms, will you be using or needing that? Effort, meanwhile, will always be decided by the rider, not the motor. It's a personal thing, it's about rider weight, torque, mindset and terrain. And agility will always be dependent on the rider, geometry and suspension design, not the weight number. Bear in mind that downhill riding can be pretty punishing and physical as well. And now that uphill technical riding is really taking off, even that 85 Newton meters from the Bosch can involve some pretty intense effort and skill if you decide. The 180 has the new updated Bosch CX motor. Already an amazing unit, one that's undergone a lot of fine-tuning since its introduction. Now even more thermally stable, which means it retains its performance even when under load. It's also quieter downhill thanks to a cheekily redesigned freewheel, and quieter uphill, which has been achieved by way of new materials in one of the internal sprockets. Great features such as extended boost means those super steep technical climbs can be conquered. You've got that 800 watt-hour battery that's removable to give you monster range, and you can go plus 1,000 if you stick that range extender on there as well, and better energy density, 205 watts per kilo up from 174. The 160 SL bike has the Bosch SX motor. It's lighter but has the capacity to reach the same peak power of 600 watts. It has a lower torque of 65 Newton meter, however, which means the CX is more potent in lumpier terrain and especially for heavier riders. The bike features a 400 watt-hour non-removable battery, and pair that with the carbon fibre frame and less travel, and it is many kilograms lighter than the 180, but you can still run that 250 range extender if you want it. The race to the bottom of the weight scales has definitely started, but is there really such a thing as a lightweight or indeed heavyweight e-mountain bike? I think lightweight can be used as a piece of jargon to describe a lower powered motor. And actually, does one require more effort than the other? Well, it depends on your style of riding and what you want from the bike. It does feel like people are getting their wires crossed when it comes to weight, with power, travel and component specifications thrown into the mix as well. And both these bikes do produce 600 watts of peak power. The SX motor does at 120 RPM cadence, so probably not that likely on super steep terrain. So this does feel like a trail killer that's super sharp. This more like a rowdy machine. Pick your poison.